Hello and welcome to episode 139 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I am Sigmund Judge. I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Devon Dundee. And can I just say, before we start, it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, Sigmund. We missed you last week. Of course, had a great episode last week with Jonathan Reed. He and I got to talk a lot, but I speak on behalf of our listeners when I say welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. And just a very quick one. A big thank you to everyone that wished me well. And one thing we've mentioned on the podcast before, never ignore any obvious signs of something being wrong. And that's something that I have to take to heart. And so occasionally I am going to miss an episode, but we're back. It was a really interesting episode we'd been planning up until the day, and there was a lot that I wanted to talk about with regard to the iPhone. And I'll be honest, Jonathan kind of stole my thunder on a lot of the points because he made similar points to me, which made me feel better and less insane.
Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on this because I got to talk about my new iPhone and Apple Watch last week, but I really want to know what you're thinking, especially with anything with camera and camera control. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.
Typically, I want to go down the typical line first in terms of color. This is the first time I've had an iPhone 16 Pro in black in years. I think you'd have to go all the way back to the 8.
Wow.
It's been that long. I'm loving it. Not so finger smudgy, and I just like it because it just feels like one piece. So I totally understand why you're all black everything. But when it comes to the actual design of the phone and some of the features, I have a little gripe. I love the concept of camera control, but when I pick up my phone, my finger is resting probably one finger away naturally from the camera control button. It's not a button, it's a camera control switch thing. And what I realized was that Apple, of course, designed it to be exactly the same amount away from the edge of the phone as the Siri power button.
Oh, so there's like some symmetry going on there rather than maybe ergonomic considerations.
That's it. And it's one of those things that I feel Apple kind of fall into occasionally, where it is like form over function. So that's disappointing. The other thing about camera control that kind of gets me a little bit, the weird compatibility with some of Apple's own apps. Now, I don't know if this has changed in the week since checking, but Final Cut Camera, which I believe is like a $5 a month experience or $50 for the year, it doesn't have support for camera control. And I just find that to be a really odd omission. Considering how new Final Cut Camera is as well, you'd imagine that it would keep up with all of the latest updates and it would be the first to take advantage of those innovations. So that was a little bit disappointing to me. But some of the use cases I have really enjoyed with camera control. I just wish that at least in the default app you could control ISO and other things like that, which I feel are kind of more geared towards the prosumer. But yeah, there's just a couple of things there that I was really looking forward to. I do like the new screen, and I do like the slimmer bezels, although I do still have my 15 Pro Max, and honestly, side by side, it's hard to tell the difference. And I haven't really noticed the increase in size on a day-to-day basis. So I'd say that's all quite positive. From a audio point of view, I've recorded some voice notes and done a few things with voice notes, and the recording quality of the mic is incredible. I think it's one of the quieter upgrades for the last number of years, actually, and I think it's really impressive. But one thing I can't get my head around, which I'm glad Jonathan mentioned on the podcast last week is the studio audio modes that I don't think they're very good, honestly. I think they're impressive for what they do, but I don't quite understand where any of that is usable. Because for me, when you're doing sound isolation, we've done it a couple of times on the podcast, and despite our best efforts, when I listen, I feel like you or I sounds a little bit like we're underwater. It just doesn't sound quite right. I've noticed that a couple of times recently with YouTubers, if they've been out on location and they've used these kind of features, and I have to turn off. I can deal with bad camera quality, but I can't deal with bad audio. And as I say, as impressive as this is, I don't really know a valid use case for it. If you're a professional in the field, like Jonathan said, you'll be using your own mics. If you're going to use it for scratch audio, then you might just use the default audio anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Audio is not magic, right? It's if you take out sounds, then you're losing part of the spectrum, and people's voices have very wide spectrums, so people don't sound like themselves when you start removing some of those frequencies. And I agree with you. It's not ideal in the couple of tests that I've seen. I was more impressed with it, I think, than you or Jonathan were. I'm still going to try it out. I think there is a middle ground between professional and people just doing home videos, where if you're just learning about filmmaking and you don't have that equipment, but you want to maybe take it one step up, I could see where you might want to experiment with these. But at the same time, like you said, for people who really know their audio stuff, it can actually be, you may be better off with just the raw audio off the mic than actually taking out parts of people's voices. So yeah, I'd say it's yet to be seen exactly how this feature is going to play out, but it's also the kind of thing that could get better with time and software where, I'd love some kind of AI machine learning tool that can kind of fill in some of those gaps in people's voices once you've taken out some of the background noise. That would be cool, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
I feel like I may have reviewed this overtly negatively, but I really do love the new phone. Couple of things that I think are standouts. The new photographic styles and how you can edit them on the fly as well when you're taking a shot. Now, if you live in a floodlit city like I do, this is a game changer for me. Rather than having to adjust brightness and everything else, you can do it straight from that with just my thumb. It's incredible. So that to me is a major bonus. And a surprise is that both on my iPhone 15 Pro Max and my iPhone 16 Pro Max, I can capture spatial photos, which I think is great. I am going to be keeping my iPhone 16 Pro Max and 15 Pro Max for some filming setups, which I'm excited about. But yeah, overall, very happy, very content. Let's see what happens a little bit later on with the software.
Yeah, for sure. Well, welcome to the not quite all black everything club, but I'll bet you're moving in that direction now, Sigmund. We'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely. Because I've got a natural titanium and a black titanium now. You know what I'm like in terms of mixing the silver and black to look like a Siri remote. The thought did cross my mind, but no one is that brave, not even me. Now, everything coming up on the show this week, we preview Where's Wonder, recap Women in Blue, but we start with a highlight on last week's streaming release of Wolves.
Two rival fixers cross paths when they're both called in to help cover up a prominent New York City official's misstep. Over one explosive night, they'll have to set aside their petty grievances and their egos to finish the job.
You fix things, right? If someone messes up, you make it okay.
More or less. There's an art to this you may not realize.
Thank you, Sensei.
Let's set this up.
If he saw us together,
They would have us all killed.
What?
Stop him!
This one stars, of course, George Clooney and Brad Pitt as the titular wolves, not wolves, as I keep trying to say and keep correcting myself. Written and directed by John Watts. Sigmund, we've been following this production for years now, from its inception to its big theatrical announcement through its filming, and then its more muted release where it had a little theatrical run, but more just the focus on the streaming release last week. Having been on this journey with Wolves and now having seen it yourself, what do you think about Wolves overall?
Well, first of all, I loved it. I genuinely think this is in my top 5 films. I've watched a lot of films this year beyond the Apple originals, and lots to come over the next few weeks and months. But yeah, I really adored this film. Before we get into the film itself, I did think it was a grand shame that this didn't come to theatres, and I'll be quite honest, I think it's a confusing one as well, because when you look at Fly Me to the Moon, for example, Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson, 2 great names, but we've never really seen them on screen, and their chemistry's never been tested with an audience. Brad Pitt and George Clooney, get those two together since the Ocean's films, and they've already proved that that duo and their kind of sparring brings in an audience. Mm-hmm. And there was like a very, very limited run of screenings for Barclaycard members at Everyman Cinemas in the UK on a Thursday night, and every single screening that I checked in London was completely sold out. They could have booked it 2-3 times over, and I think that's proof, in my opinion, and we'll have to see what the box office records are like for the limited run in the US, but I think it's proof that this was not the film to kind of abandon the theatrical run with. And from a writing perspective as well, there were certain jokes and certain comedic moments in this, and I didn't expect this to be as funny as it was, right? There was something about those moments that I just longed to have watched it with an audience. Did you feel similar, or?
Well, I really enjoyed it just like you did, and I found it hilarious in a way that I wasn't totally expecting, I think very similar to you. But having watched it at home with my wife, just the two of us, I think I kind of understand a little bit more the decision to pull back on the theatrical release. While I still wish it had that big, release and fanfare that I would love to see for so many films, and this one with the big names, I think it would have made sense. But something about this one, maybe it was the focus of it, how it's so focused on the 2 main characters, and the rest of the cast is actually pretty small. There's a couple of group scenes, but for the most part, it's a really focused film on these 2 individuals. That, to me, for whatever reason, gave me a little bit more of like watching at home on the smaller screen vibes. Not that, again, I wouldn't have loved to have seen it with a crowd. And like you said, those laughs, I think having at least one other person with you to laugh along is good. But being in a crowd would be better. But I've been really confused by this decision. I still wonder if it wasn't just some bad timing and Wolves kind of just got caught in the middle of something bigger than itself. But at the same time, having seen it now, I'm like, okay, I could kind of understand why you could watch this one and think maybe this would fit more on streaming than on the big screen.
Fair. Let's talk about the film itself. To me, the whole film had a very 1970s era feel to it. As we kind of get introduced from one character to the other, to a great monologue scene that we're going to talk about in a moment from one of the supporting cast, and I think the highlight of the film. There was something about this film that stylistically reminded me of The Sting with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Because in that film, you've got 2 fixers that are like sparring with one another. And we have very, very similar feel to this, especially with Brad Pitt's character.
Yeah, I'd not seen The Sting, but having heard you describe it that way and seen this one, that very much puts it higher on my list of things I need to see, because I love this concept of the two fixers who are kind of pitted against one another, or in this case, they're put on the same task, but just the nature of their job, they're not going to play well with other people, right? That's how they roll. They're not meant to be on a team, which is a huge part of the comedy of this film. But I mean, I was laughing from the very beginning because I think even in that very first bar scene, there's some subversion of this shtick, I think, that you just start to see it break down a little bit. The idea of someone answering a call from a phone booth in 2024 is just hilarious. You know, the fact that there's even a phone booth in the middle of the bar, I think that's really funny. And whereas in a film maybe like The Sting back in the 70s, that would have been played more serious, here I think there's just a little bit of an edge to it where it's like, okay, you know, there's more happening here than meets the eye. Of course, George Clooney shows up. He's ready to help fix this problem. He starts getting to work. He assures this politician that everything's going to be okay. And then suddenly this other fixer walks in. And of course, they don't know, is this some intruder? Is this someone who's after them? And eventually they figure out that this guy thinks he's George Clooney, right? He thinks he's the fixer. He's here to resolve this. And he's been hired by the hotel owner who's been spying on them to come in and fix it. So you've got these two guys both brought in to solve this problem, but they're coming from two different angles, really with two different motivations, which at least at the beginning kind of puts them in conflict with one another. But they're told, you have to work this out. This has to happen because we're all here and we're all in this situation together and there's only one way out. So you two just have to figure it out. And it leads to all kinds of hilarious hijinks.
I think the really fun aspect where this all gets going is how you've got moments of, well, I don't want to show you all of my tricks. And then at like a flick of a switch, Jack is showing Nick his shtick when it comes to hiding a body in a clothes bag, right?
Yeah, I kind of got the vibe throughout the film, actually, that these guys, as much as they might be skilled at what they're doing, they don't fit the typical psyche of a fixer. They're not grisly. They're not the kind of people to do whatever it takes to get the job done. They're willing to bend the rules a little bit, but they both at their core, and I think probably this is necessary for the film to work comedically, at their core, they're just normal guys. You know, they can see somebody do a cool trick and appreciate that, and they can be a little bit insecure about their own skills and performing in front of somebody else. And so there's a relatability there. There's this sense that while they do have this very unique job, they're not so different from us in that sense. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So there's a version of this film where these two guys are just like really, really like hardcore and unrelatable. And I feel like that version of the film would not be nearly as much fun as this one. And I think that's a really unique element of it. But the other super unique element I think that we have to talk about is Austin Abrams as the supposed victim, or the person they're trying to take care of, they presume is dead, and then suddenly come to the realization that he very much is not, and sets them off on this wild goose chase throughout New York City, which so many things about his performance to commend, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the casting of Austin Abrams as Kid and following this character in the predicament that he's found himself in, I think Brad Pitt and George Clooney done a great service to this young upcoming actor. We're so used to Brad and George being great together, but there's a particular scene where I was literally in stitches. They're in a motel room, which is like a safari themed. And Nick, who's played by Brad Pitt, goes over to get some water to get this guy to be less dehydrated and start talking. And he flicks the switch, and you get all this neon lights, and you get all of these animal sounds. And I lost it, Devon. wasn't even so much what Austin Abrams did in terms of the monologue that we'll get into, but just the subtle looks between him and George Clooney and this intense friction between him and Brad Pitt, who clearly doesn't have the patience that the, I'd say, older, wiser Jack has.
Yeah, that motel scene I feel like is just a microcosm of the whole film, because again, it's these two guys who are very good at their jobs, but because they're put together, they can't follow their usual routine, and so they end up in this ridiculous scenario where they're renting this hotel room hourly, by the way, because it's the cheapest option and they don't want to go to their own safe houses. And imagining that scene from Kid's point of view, where he wakes up in the trunk, he has no idea what he's done. You learn a little bit later that he's kind of gotten himself into a situation that he doesn't fully understand, where he's involved with some people that he really shouldn't be. But they brought him to this motel. He does not understand what's about to happen to him. And then you've got these two guys who are obviously not on the same page. They're having to leave the room multiple times to kind of get back on track as far as this interrogation they're trying to do from very different perspectives. And then he's trying to, once he has an opportunity to speak, just to communicate to them his point of view and how he's ended up here.
Yeah, with a full explanation of his complete day leading up. The nice thing about this, I think, and we talked about it in the lead up, where I think it was someone at the BBC wrote that this felt very much like a different take on the male psyche. And there is like a kind of a fatherly element to this, where Nick and Jack are kind of playing that role at the end of this film. I genuinely thought this was brilliant. I thought it was beautiful as well. Really dark, quite gritty. Again, playing back to that 70s era of film. And, you know, we talk about video only being part of the picture. In terms of sound, a friend of the show, Theodore Shapiro, did the score for this film. And absolutely stunning work. Kind of reminiscent, actually, of Martin Scorsese's After Hours, which was taken off on a Ted Lasso episode. We'll hear more from Theodore Shapiro when Severance returns in January, no doubt. I'm very much looking forward to that. But going back to Wolves, it ends in an interesting way. This announcement of a sequel in the weeks leading up to Wolf's release, initially I thought was a little bit tacked on, and I think people assumed, okay, this is like the deal sweetener for, I'm sure, John Watts, who would be as disappointed as the lead stars Brad Pitt and George Clooney for this not making its way theatrically. But the end of the film suggests that this was the plan all along. And I really want to see a second film. It
definitely sets us up for a second, and I hope we do see it. I still just wonder, and I'm always going to wonder because I'm just this kind of person. I'm curious about people's reactions to things. And, you know, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, John Watts, the news that this film is not going to be released theatrically widely, coming alongside the official announcement of the sequel, which I'm sure that they, you know, were well aware of that part of it and had signed on. But it's, you know, that theatrical change I'm sure was a surprise. So having those two things come out at the same time, like you said, it definitely feels like a little bit of spin, trying to make it more of a positive thing. And I hope that there's nothing that about that change that could impact the sequel, because I really do want to see it. But as far as Apple's concerned, it's happening. They've announced that it's happening and that John Watts, George Clooney, Brad Pitt are all returning. And I really hope it does happen that way because, yeah, like you said, the way the film ends, they're definitely setting themselves up for more in the future. And I'd love to see this pair back together on screen.
Well, if you have yet to see Wolves, now is the time. It's streaming on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens. But my gosh, please watch it on the biggest screen you can. And with people. I think the writing really plays itself to watching with an audience. So yeah, get the popcorn ready and have a blast.
It's streaming on Apple TV Plus. We can only hope to someday see it in the store tab to where we can actually buy it and add it to our libraries and have it there. I almost said permanently, Sigmund, but it's not permanent necessarily, is it? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But before we get there, you had pointed out something that had changed when watching purchase content that we saw come to streaming content a while back. You want to run me through this a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started, I think, a couple of years ago with Apple Originals, where you'd watch an Apple Original and then at the end of an episode, the credits would minimize and you'd be able to kind of peruse different titles and continue watching. Really nice, very glossy, very cool. As a purist, I really dislike it. I hit the back button straight away to bring back the credits, because if you don't, that next show will start auto-playing. And I think it's quite disruptive to the whole TV app experience and user experience. I actually had an instance where Bad Sisters, I've already seen it. Great. I was recommended to watch it again because obviously it's something that's being pushed to them. And the episode started at the end of the timer. And now I had to kind of go back out, go into my up next queue, go to the show, and mark all of the episodes as watched again, just to keep in track with how the up next queue should work, right? And so I'm frustrated to find that this feature, the feature that I'm going to say is not a feature, is a hindrance to the experience, but this feature has now expanded to purchases. So purchase content, when you finish a film, for example, the credits will minimize again. But I think there's like a set time. I don't actually think they have the metadata for when the credits start rolling, because as someone shared on social media just the other week, the end of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is a massive reveal. If you've not seen it, kind of spoiler warning, you've had plenty of years to watch it. It minimizes on this big reveal.
Wow.
And it completely ruins the film and the movie experience. So I will say this is terrible. And there are certain things that have happened with the TV app recently that are kind of like head scratching, to be quite honest with you. Lots of people complained about the advertising. I kind of don't like it either. That said, if you look at other platforms and what they're doing, Apple being quite tame in comparison, and they're not selling your data, right? That's a bonus. You have to weigh those up. Would I prefer Apple not to lower their standards to others? Yes. But I think we're just in a different era. Last year, we saw gifting get disabled. You still can't gift a film or a TV show to a friend, which is absolutely crazy. You used to be able to do it nice and easy from the share sheet. Disappeared. Never came back. Same with wish lists. They were removed with the deprecation of iTunes movies and TV show apps. Then they got reinstated to show users wish lists that they already had, but you can't add any more to them. But the good news is, about all of this, there is a fix, at least for this minimizing of purchased content. But it's a bit of a hassle. Instead of accessing your purchased film or TV show from the TV app search, go to your library, initiate from there, and you'll be able to watch fine without any minimizations. That to me is crazy. We've talked previously about there being a real inconsistency between even how like TV shows are displayed in the library compared to how they're displayed when you search for them in the TV app. This is another one, but thankfully this inconsistency is here, because if they manage to do this minimization on movies that are played back from the library, I think I might lose it a little bit. So there's at least a bit of a fix there as of now, but yeah, not good.
Yeah, it's I mean, you can see the logic. You follow, trying to keep engagement up and keep people in the TV app, whatever. Like, there's reasons for these decisions, but those reasons go contrary to the purpose of the TV app, which is to enjoy your content. That's what the TV app is for. And when these decisions for minimization and, again, engagement get in the way of you enjoying your content, that's where I just feel like you can't call it anything less than a regression, right? It's moving in the wrong direction.
Well, to me, it just feels like decisions are being made from two different teams. And the reason why I think that is because if you wanted access to, hey, if you like this, watch this, you've actually got the ability to do that within the video player itself, because Apple's own tools, they're used by third-party apps. We talked about it a few weeks ago. And a lot of third-party apps use a tab in that video player to be able to show and recommend other shows and other films related. And Apple aren't dogfooding their own ideas. And that is disappointing to me. So I would love to see everyone just kind of get round the table and really kind of have a sole kind of direction that they want to go down. Because it's really confusing as well from a UI standpoint. If someone's not technically savvy, there's a lot that can kind of go wrong. Suddenly I'm playing this. How did this start now? It's just really bad for the overall TV app experience.
One last thing on this that I'll say, I'm not trying to be too negative, but just a little bit more perspective about where this is a problem for me. And I run into this streaming in the TV app on Apple Originals all the time. Different shows, I have different settings for how I like them to be, especially when it comes to subtitles. Usually I'll leave it in auto, but some shows, just for whatever reason, I prefer to watch them with subtitles on, or sometimes you change the track on the audio for whatever reason. And if you leave those things on, then they're still set the next time you watch a different show. And so as the credits are rolling, one thing I always do is I put all my settings back the way that I want them originally. But what I've run into now is that big window pops up. I have to tap back into the credits in order to get back to the video player and make those adjustments. So there's just lots of little impacts of these decisions. I like what you said about it coming up in the video player itself. I feel like that could actually solve some issues if they would integrate it in there instead of making it a full screen pop-up.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't take you away from the content.
Yeah, and they've already built the solution to the problem they've made.
Right, they just need to implement it.
And the other thing is the branding as well. If you look at the branding of when the credits minimize, is branded iTunes movies and TV shows. So I don't know what's going on. At least there's a solution. Mm-hmm. Hopefully there's something that can be resolved and really looked into. It's interesting though, because I think we all know one or two people that may pirate their content rather than purchasing it and subscribing the legal way. And they can do everything with their content, right? Whereas when we purchase films and whatnot, we deal with these kind of issues, but then we're not free to really do anything with the file. That I think might start to change because California are at it again with a new law, and I'm very, very positive about this. Law AB 2426, the Consumer Protection Against False Advertising of Digital Goods. We've kind of talked about something around these lines not that long ago, Devon, about how we would like digital purchases to go and be more transparent as to what they are, and we'll go further down the line of what we hope will happen. But what is this law actually doing?
So what this law is doing is forcing sellers to be more clear about what exactly consumers are buying when they purchase digital content. Because right now, when you go into the iTunes movie store and you buy a film, the language sort of implies that you're buying the movie, right? You're buying a copy of this film, but that's not actually what you're purchasing. You're purchasing a license to the film to gain access to it. And we've talked about this before, not too long ago. Consumers have learned the hard way that those licenses aren't always permanent, because the seller has to also maintain their ability to sell those licenses and continue to carry those films. And so what this law would require is just some clarity around, okay, are you actually buying this content, or are you just buying a license to the content that is subject to these obviously totally different rules that it's just very different, the concept of having the rights to view something versus actually having a file that you can take to different devices and do what you want with. The comparison that you and I have talked about in our conversations leading up to this is around the way Apple sells music, right? Because that's a totally different way than the way they sell films.
Yeah. For a number of years now, music purchased in iTunes has been DRM free, which means that you can take that file, you pretty much own the music, and you can take it wherever you want, play it on whatever media player you want. There isn't that when it comes to the TV app and movies. And I'd imagine, I'll be quite honest, I was surprised that the music industry allowed for DRM-free copies. I don't see the movie studios allowing that to happen, at least lying down. I think they'd almost have to be forced to. I don't think Apple would have any issue with it. Interestingly, when you purchase movies and TV shows, you're purchasing the 1080p license for that, but you get the free upgrade to 4K, right? So if we were to ever get digital copies and DRM free that we could take with us, when it comes to Apple, I would imagine, of course, industry standards change and there may be a change in there, but I would imagine what you would be getting is a 1080p copy, with the 4K upgrade being, if you stream on the platform. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes, because it does feel like this law, which is a California law, but let's be honest, this isn't only going to happen to California residents. This is going to happen everywhere, because we can't start splitting different UI elements up by state, right, and region. So this is the first step. I've got a funny feeling, and this is something that's played out before, and we've talked a little bit about it on the podcast, and we have differing opinions on the EU and what they do, but I think from a EU perspective, if they were to kind of like take this as the first step and then say, okay, DRM'd content, we want it to be DRM free, we want the consumer to actually own a copy of this rather than a license, I think that would probably lend to a bit of legitimacy from their side when it comes to their current stance of their pursuit of Apple and big tech being driven by the better consumer experience, which is something we could argue about until the cows come home. But if it was to happen, this would be something that I would applaud and I would hope for. So,
yeah, I think it would be amazing. This is a step in the right direction, but at the same time, I think it depends on how the storefronts comply, because it could be as simple as a pop-up kind of interstitial as you are confirming your purchase. They have to say, okay, you're not really buying a copy of this, you're just buying the license to it. And maybe they could even be required to put how long their current access deal is and when that expires, and maybe keep consumers informed on when those are renewed. That could be another way this could go. But definitely I would prefer if it just led to a DRM future, not only for films and movies, but also for ebooks, which is another area where moving your purchases around is just an absolute nightmare.
I mean, kind of going back to movies and the experience that we were talking about with the feature that's not a feature and is a hindrance. If the TV app or the Amazon storefront or, whoever else were having to compete with basically media servers where you would be able to store your purchases. Would the user experience then become the priority again to keep people within their app? I think it would. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens. Very quickly, you mentioned last week about a feature in the beta for 18.1 on tvOS, one that we've been waiting for quite a while. Some kind of division between the up next queue, where you have everything that you're watching currently, and things that you want to save for later. Right? It's been a wish for many, many years. It looks like it's coming. Up next is, by means of the beta and what we're seeing, is going to be renamed to Continue Watching. And that's going to have everything that you will continue watching that you've already started. And there's going to be another queue called the watch list, which at the moment in the betas, if you hold down and you add, it will say add to your watch list. And neither of us thought it was baked in and implemented until a couple of days ago, when I realized that it was about 5 or 6 rows down, which is typical of how Apple have been implementing things in the TV app, because for all of you has been a feature that I don't think anyone used because it was just so hidden. In my opinion, once this goes to the general public, the watch list needs to be right below up next for it to be usable, because it's not clear what it is until you realise and you start thinking, well, I added something to my up next queue and it's not there. And of course, there's probably some development to go. It's not fully baked in. But there's a thumbs up for tvOS this week, right?
Yeah, I love the concept. It's something we've talked about quite a bit. Be very interesting to see how it's actually implemented and where that watch list ends up. If it's some kind of like you can switch between continue watching in your watch list somehow, or if it is a totally different row, we'll just have to wait and see. But I'm still waiting for my watch list to show up on my phone. It's not there yet, but it's beta life, right? We're just keeping an eye out and trying to predict how it's all going to land.
Something else we've been keeping an eye on and we've been theorizing about, and we got an update on, which I'm very, very excited about, is Apple's next moves into the smart home space. Mark Gurman's back with his Power On newsletter last weekend, talking about that next step.
Yeah, Mark was giving us some details of Apple's upcoming smart display products for the home. We've heard of lots of little tidbits here and there of what this could be, and there's been some confusion about how many products are actually in development and what features go with which. But you and I have speculated in the past that we're talking about 2 different products. A lower end one that's kind of a HomePod with a screen, and then a higher end one that is almost more of a robotic thing that can swivel and follow you around and maybe do more iPad style stuff like that. And that's exactly what Mark Gurman talked about in his newsletter this week. He talked about the breakdown between these 2 products, how they're both being developed and how they're both coming along. He mentions that both will run a fork of tvOS called HomeOS that's going to support Apple Intelligence and be capable of placing FaceTime calls, controlling smart home devices, and running apps like Calendar and Notes. And he even says that the lower-end device could come as early as next year. Now, this lower-end one is the one I'm most excited about. I don't need a $1,000 tabletop robot following me around when I'm making my video calls necessarily.
Yes, you do.
Oh,
yes,
I do. Well, okay. We'll see when it comes. But in the meantime, this smart display sounds awesome. I would immediately set it up as a digital photo frame in my kitchen or on my bedside table or both. You'd be able to play, hopefully play music and things like that out of it and control your home. And this just sounds so compelling to me. And you and I have talked in the past about other products in this space from other companies and how much people love them, but how they don't integrate with the Apple services and Apple's privacy policies and all this sort of thing. So I think this product sounds really nice. And knowing the full gamut of what Apple is going to be offering here, or at least what they're working on, according to Mark Gurman, how it's going to be a product line starting as soon as next year. That has me really excited. And of course, the impending coming of HomeOS, an operating system that we've heard about for so long that might actually have a product next year.
Yeah, we got a little bit more detail, right, based on some code that 9to5Mac managed to dig up, mentioning that this device that's currently being tested on is running an A18 chip, has a squarish display, which is interesting to me if it's going to work with, the existing content. It's a interesting choice there if that's what we end up getting. Built-in camera for FaceTime calls and hand gesture recognition, which is something that I have always said, if Apple go all the way and do hand gestures for like Siri controls and that kind of thing to bring that intelligence aspect to people with disabilities, that's going to be a game changer, right? And it's going to be a industry first. Where Felipe Esposito in his reporting kind of got me thinking was he was talking about how the screensavers and that new kind of like card UI where you can switch between the screensavers and tvOS 18, how he theorized that that could be very much the same kind of elements of how we would be navigating such a device. I went straight to my Apple TV and had a play around, and I totally see that, because that whole design feels very touch-based.
It makes a lot of sense, and a product like the Apple TV, of course, it has some touch interactions with the touchpad on the Siri remote, but it's really meant for not super precise navigation, which is very much what I think we'd see with a smart display, where you're not going to be typing out iMessages and emails on this thing. This is for displaying information. Maybe the most you would do is switch between apps or start and stop playback on something. But I could definitely see some of those gestures and then the hand gestures that Apple seems to be incorporating into all their products now, which is, as you said, a huge win for accessibility and just a great usability addition. I think between those two things, it could be something really compelling.
From a features standpoint, is there one thing that you'd have top on your list that would be like, okay, this is an instant game changer?
I'm probably showing my dad side here, but I would love to use it as a photo frame. I think that would be really cool. I mean, I basically use my Apple TV as that now. So what about you?
I mean, I think that's a given. The thing that I would love to see, I'd love to see alongside this the introduction of synchronized AirPlay video. So if I'm watching something on an Apple TV in the living room and I have to go and make some snacks during the big game, I've got it there in real time as well. So
that would be incredible.
That would only be using the SharePlay API that's already there, right? So I'd imagine it's doable and ready to go. But that's the thing that will really just kind of go, yes, take my wallet.
And of course, it'll be interesting to see the third-party app story for this platform, as well as it's kind of forking off of tvOS and could maybe even eventually be recombined. That's something that Mark talked about. Maybe eventually they would all be running the same operating system, Smart Display, Apple TV, and HomePod. But always interesting to see what third-party developers come up with.
Absolutely. Let's talk about development and apps. One app that when I first started doing Apple TV and tvOS coverage, one of the apps that I kind of profiled mostly, and it was at the time where you really were using it to deliver a outside aerial for over-the-air broadcasts, and that's Channels. Now, it amazes me that Channels is still going, and they've really, over the years, expanded on their offerings for what they do. So not only can you bring in over-the-air broadcasts, but you can also input M3U playlists and have your Mac run as a server for that as well. But they've really taken advantage of the different integrations that Apple offer to developers, including shortcuts. I have shortcuts for every channel on my M3U playlist for streamed channels, and I'm able to kind of use those in far more complex automations, which is so cool. You can also record, and you can just do so much. It's well worth checking out. But Channel 6.0 is now available, and with it introduces the ability to create personalized sections in your library, because one other thing I didn't mention was that you can bring in your files and have it play out as a media server, very much like Plex. But it also brings in something I love, and that's a theater mode that will play trailers and a feature presentation pre-roll at the beginning of your movie, which just blows my mind. I think it's great, especially if you're really after that one thing, maybe at Christmas time, and you want to leave a hint to a family member. Just put the trailer for that thing right before the film that you have all sat down to watch. So I love this.
Yeah, this is such a cool idea, and just one of those little things that as people continue to invest in their home theater setups, this kind of just gives you a little bit more of that theatrical experience. My favorite thing to do when I go to the theater and I'm waiting on the film to start is during the trailers, if you're with a group of people, you try to guess what trailer or what movie that trailer is for in the first 3 seconds. And sometimes you can get it, and sometimes you get it hilariously wrong, which is also fun.
I love that. It kind of reminds me of there's like a music quiz that's a shortcut that I have on my phone that I play occasionally with Apple Music, and I have to guess the song as quickly as I can. And there's a game as well that's fully fledged on Apple Arcade. Song Pop, is it?
Song Pop Party, very fun game, and you can compete against other people. It's an awesome game. So yeah, same concept, but now you can do it with channels as well.
I want that for movies and trailers. So if anyone's listening, I think there's a gap in the market there.
Movie Pop Party. In Apple app news, the company is highlighting narrative series in Apple Podcasts with a new series category, a top 100 series chart, and monthly curated series essentials, starting with Ghost Story from Wondery and Odyssey's Pineapple Street Studios, which is available in full and ad-free. So they're going to be adding a new essential each month, and it's pretty cool that this one is previously behind a paywall, but they're going to make it available to Apple Podcast listeners to check out without ads and for free, because it's just a narrative story that they really want people to experience.
Yeah, I mean, Apple Podcasts, the home of podcasts, they coined the phrase, right? And now I believe they're lying in second to Spotify when it comes to podcast usage, and maybe even behind YouTube at this point. So anything to bring people in. And I got to say, a lot of the recent additions to the Podcasts app, including transcripts and channels and everything else, I think it's great. It's become, again, the place that I go to listen to podcasts, and I've checked everything out. Maybe I'll end up back at Overcast. I kind of want to look at Pocket Casts again, and Castro I've heard good things about in recent times. Where do you listen to your podcasts?
I've been an Apple Podcast user for over 10 years. When I first picked up podcasts, it was in Apple Podcasts, and I've never really strayed. Now, I use them all because we make a podcast, and I want to keep an eye on how our podcast is rolling out in other podcast apps. And, we want to make sure we're sharing the links for wherever you listen, that you can get easy access to it. So I check them all out, but for my personal listening, it's always been Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, there was a major design change, and it really threw me. And so I went to Overcast, and then there was one update recently with Overcast that then pushed me back to Apple Podcasts. So I'm kind of in between, but it's really difficult to kind of keep hold of, all your subscriptions and make sure that everything is up to date if you're switching between them. So yeah, Apple Podcasts is the way. From your favorite podcast app to your favorite streaming app, but is it your favorite anymore, Devon? I mean, obviously beyond the TV app.
Yeah, I mean, TV app always going to be number one, but everyone here knows I'm a Disney Plus stan, especially now that they've got Hulu in there in the United States. I mean, come on, like I could basically just live there between that and the TV app. But, they're making a move that was expected, but, still going to be disappointing for a lot of people to hear. And that is that Disney's password sharing crackdown is now in full effect across the United States, Canada, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Europe, and the Asia Pacific region, which is a huge swath of people. They've really gone all out with this password sharing crackdown. Of course, following Netflix's playbook here, which has been very successful for Netflix, to be fair. So Disney Plus subscribers can add what they're calling an extra member to their account for $6.99 a month or $9.99 a month for premium subscribers. So if you're ad-free, you have to pay more for that extra user. And this option is not available to Disney Bundle subscribers, which is interesting because that's really where they push people to go. So if you're a Disney Bundle subscriber and you're password sharing, there's no option to add a person outside your household to your account. So they're just going to have to, go get their own account, I guess. It's one of those things that we've talked about it before with Netflix. It doesn't take into account every family household situation, and they put in some measures for if you travel throughout the year, being able to shift your main location and confirm with an email code and all that good stuff. And we've talked before even about, there's options for you to figure it out if you're really in a pickle with the situation. But a lot of people, I have to imagine, who are password sharing now are just going to hit that extra account button and pay the extra and move on. And that's what they're counting on. Now, if you do stick with Disney Plus or add that extra member, you are going to get access to 4 new always-on live playlists. They rolled out ABC News and a preschool one previously. Now they're adding Hallowstream, which is the holiday one, obviously, for spooky season, Hits and Heroes, Throwback, and Real Life. So Disney's getting a little bit into that. It's kind of a throwback to the old days, right? That live TV thing where you just jump in wherever it's at and just watch whatever's on, which I think a lot of people enjoy. And I could definitely see myself throwing on a number of these. I think this could actually be really fun, especially that holiday one.
Yep. Something that Apple should follow suit on, in my opinion. And, they could do a mixture, right? They could do the odd episode from a certain show, and they could mix it in with trailers, because we have 2 astonishing trailers. Last week we had 2 astonishing trailers. This week, even more so, and they are slightly related. But let's start with Shrinking Season 2, where side effects may include tears, laughter, and jimmying.
I think we're all on a hot streak.
You wearing your sex boxes at work for, you little freak?
Dress for the job you want.
This is what I hate to come out of my office. It's not your patient's job to heal you.
Well, maybe I don't have enough boundaries. But we should be working together, like Batman and Robin. You already sound like him.
I'm gonna make you pay for that.
That's exactly what Batman would say.
I'm really excited for Shrinking, and I'm going to have to be very, very careful on what I say and what I don't say. So, when it comes to Shrinking Season 2 and its trailer, what did you think?
I'm so excited for Shrinking to get back to it. I mean, from that very first shot where all the characters are sitting on the bench, it's like, oh man, I'm just so happy to get back with this group of people and laugh along with them. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, lots of jimmying, which is the term for Jimmy's therapy style, where he goes out of the office and does that non-traditional approach, which I guess we're going to be continuing in season 2. But one story element that's hinted in the trailer too that I'm really excited about for this season, and was also kind of very briefly mentioned in season 1, but I think we're really going to get into it this season, is Jimmy's own grief and working through his reaction to losing his wife and coming out of that. And, he's gotten past maybe that initial reaction, but there's still healing to be done there. And I love the line from Harrison Ford's character, "You can't expect your patients to heal you," right? And I think that's kind of what we saw through season 1. And so I think we're going to see some growth from Jimmy there.
We did end season 1 on quite a dramatic cliffhanger. So it's going to be interesting to see how his one patient kind of gets herself out of a particular situation and what his involvement is in there.
Yes, I talked about in our recap of season 1 that Jimmy's actually not the world's best therapist. And like in the real world, he would probably be in a jumpsuit himself. But yeah, I'm interested to see. That's one of those things where when you're writing the end of a season, you write the best ending you can, whether you're going to continue or not. And now they have to, of course, deal with the repercussions of that decision. So we'll see what happens. Very, very brief appearance of Brett Goldstein in this trailer. We knew he was coming, and he just flashes for a brief second, almost unrecognizable without his Roy Kent beard. And really excited to see his involvement this season. Of course, he's been behind the scenes of the show all along, but getting to see him on screen is going to be great. And then the last thing I'll say on this trailer, because I feel like I'm gushing, is that I love the song playing underneath this trailer. It's Blue Skies by Kid Cudi. And I immediately looked it up and added it to my Apple Music library because it's so catchy and the perfect combination for this trailer of just kind of the feelings that it's meant to give you. It's supposed to be uplifting, but of course there's grief and sadness and the full range of emotions mixed in there as well. And that's what I love about this show.
And I think the choice in the song was quite purposeful as well, and the choice in the artist, because Kid Cudi has been very, very open in what is, an industry that is kind of full of machismo and, being a particular type of man in the rap industry. He's been incredibly open, and he deserves all of his success. Cannot wait for Shrinking to return. When it does on October 16th on Apple TV+. Very, very excited for its return, and I cannot wait to talk about it and share our thoughts. But from one shrink to another shrink, a shrink in need of a shrink, is that common? Because it seems to be something that seems to be going between these two. We got the first trailer this week for Before, the new limited series from and starring Billy Crystal. After tragically losing his wife, child psychiatrist Dr. Eli Adler encounters a troubled young boy who seems to have a haunting connection to his past.
You've had a successful career helping troubled kids. Can you identify the moment that changed?
It's the day my wife died.
You know what you did.
I feel like there's a reason he found me. If we're connected, maybe I could save him.
Are you sure?
This is created by Sarah Thorpe, starring Billy Crystal, Judith Light, Jacoby Dupe, Rosie Perez, Maria Dizia, and Ava Lalazazada. Took a few goes, but we got there, Devon.
Yeah. Well, we got to watch our pronunciations. We know someone's on the lookout now.
What did you think of this trailer? Pretty incredible.
Yes, I just had to sit there for a minute after watching this one. I was completely stunned after watching it, because this is another one we've heard the synopsis so many times, and I feel like you hear that synopsis and then you watch the trailer, and just the story here is absolutely thrilling and absolutely terrifying at the same time. There seems to be this supernatural element that's really at play here that I don't know. I don't know if it wants to go all the way to horror, but that's kind of what it's bordering on for me, at least from this first trailer. What'd you think?
Yeah, I was horrified, but, I love this kind of stuff, right? That occasionally comes to Apple. I love a psychological thriller. I think this is what it is. I don't know if you've seen the artwork for this, the poster art for this series. It's horrifying.
Yes. Yes, it is. It's like Billy Crystal kind of peeling back the layers of his own scalp.
Face.
Yeah,
right?
and then the little boy is coming out. Yeah, very unnerving, I would say. I like the typography and the way it's kind of a combination of like childlike handwriting, but then some of the letters look like they've been scratched into wood with a fingernail, like you see in the trailer. And that's also just, the whole thing is just unsettling in the best way, I think. Now, I'll say Jacoby Jupe is seemingly a standout, I think, from this trailer, which is, of course, incredible when you see the people that he's paired up with. I mean, Billy Crystal, and I'm a big fan of Rosie Perez, and we get a little glimpse of her in the trailer. But this performance from this young boy, I mean, when a child can get some of those creepier elements right, the effect is so strong, and it really looks like from the trailer that he just nailed it here. So I'm excited about that element as well, and I think that this is going to be a performance from Jacoby that we're going to be talking about for a long time.
Well, not long until we do get to talk about that performance and everyone else's, because before premieres October 25th on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens, we do have some other Apple original news to share, starting with some release news. You know what to expect when it comes to holiday season and the classic Peanuts holiday specials. That time of year has come round once again, quicker this year than previous years, I think. Those classic Peanuts holiday specials will be available to stream for free in the TV app this holiday season, beginning with It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown on October 19th and 20th, a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving on November 23rd and 24th, and finally, a Charlie Brown Christmas, the classic, available to stream for free without subscription on December 14th and 15th. And of course, Apple TV Plus subscribers, you can watch it whenever you want. So if you feel Christmassy still in January or February, or Halloweeny, way into the Christmas period, you can watch them at your leisure.
Yeah, go for it. I do appreciate that Apple does this. It's important, especially here in the US, where these specials typically air on like PBS or some kind of very, very easy to access TV channel. And that has changed since the rights have gone over to Apple, and they want to continue that tradition of giving people free access. And, it also gives them an opportunity to get people in the TV app and exploring what that's like. So yeah, I think this is one of those situations that works out great for everyone, and happy that everyone will be able to enjoy those specials this year, because I know I personally, this is a huge part of my holiday tradition is watching these.
Around Christmas time also, I tend to watch stuff like Bridgerton and Dickinson, but one that I think is going to be added to my list maybe this Christmas season. We'll have to wait and see how quickly this is coming. The Buccaneers is returning for its second season. We don't have a date yet, but we do have a new cast member.
We do, and this was announced in a really fun way on YouTube. There was a little YouTube short of all the actresses running around the set whispering in each other's ears, and then they run to the front door of the castle that they're all filming in, and they open the door, and it's Leighton Meester standing on the front porch in full Buccaneers garb. So she's joined the cast. We don't know what her role will be, but we know she'll be a part of season 2. So exciting for especially Gossip Girl fans, I would say. That's probably where most people will know Leighton from. A cool addition to the cast.
It's come to that point where we need to talk about this week's Apple TV releases and what is appearing in your Up Next queue and what's just available in general in the TV app. Starting with the premiere of Where's Wanda? This is a show that we have been looking forward to. It's the first German language limited series coming to Apple TV Plus. We talked a little bit about that element of the show just a couple of weeks ago, but it's now available for everyone to check out, and we have some thoughts on its first episode.
We do. So we're going to do just a little mini highlight preview here. We'll start with the synopsis just for anyone who's not familiar. After the Klatt's daughter goes missing, they take matters into their own hands and hatch a wild plan: spy on the neighborhood. As they make their way into small-time espionage, shocking secrets come to light, one by one. I think that's a pretty good description of the series, but especially that first episode where you really set up how the Klatz family gets to the point that they are. And it's an interesting story. I'll say I personally enjoyed the first episode. I thought it was a fun format, getting things from Wanda's perspective where she's introducing the family, kind of slowly, comfortably introduces you to a very obviously disturbing premise that this girl has gone missing in the woods and her family is trying to find her. And the episode, like I said, it starts off with this fun kind of introduction, but it does get very serious very quickly. And I'll say that by the end of the first episode, I completely understand how Wanda's parents end up at the conclusion that they come to. You know, you see them going to these lengths to try to find their daughter to the point that they're spying on their neighbors, but you also watch the steps of how they get there. And putting myself in their shoes as a parent myself now, yeah, I could totally sympathize and see how they get there.
Yeah, I totally sympathize as well. But I got to say, initially, I honestly didn't know what to make of this show, at least the first episode. It starts off with a big explainer of the town, but also its traditions leading up to Wanda's disappearance. And soon we're whisked to a TV show set where Wanda's parents are talking and trying to plead with Wanda or anyone that knows where Wanda is to bring her back or for her to come home. And this particular moment is very, very contrasty, right? There's a massive to and fro between dramatic and comedic. You have a mother who's almost in breakdown mode, gets very, very aggressive, and you've got a father who has been made up a lot. He mentions and is very kind of conscious of his appearance and says, do I look like Donald Trump? You know, I'm a little bit concerned about this. Oh, no, it's fine. He clearly does. And whilst everyone's being introduced, his seat keeps sliding down. And I couldn't help but laugh, but then feel incredible pain for the mother. It's a really weird kind of mishmash. And I think maybe a humour that we aren't necessarily used to. And that's always going to be interesting when looking at content from different continents. I think, though, by the end of this episode, I kind of got where this show could potentially be going. And if it does, it's going to make for an absolutely bonkers finale. So I'll be watching weekly with my German-speaking family. And talking of family...
Yeah, there was one particular member of Wanda's family that I wanted to highlight because I really enjoyed his performance and the inclusion of Ollie, played by Leo Simon, a character who wears a hearing aid and uses sign language, who's played by an actor who does the same. I think we always want to celebrate that. And I think it's a great inclusion, and also interested to see just how exactly things go for him, because we get to see him as kind of the base station master for some of the surveillance that they're doing. So he's in on the plot, but it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. So I just thought his inclusion was great. And like you said, definitely setting us up for an interesting journey. I think as it gets closer to the end, we might have to share our theories about what could have happened to Wanda, and we'll see what happens. But if you want to, you can check out the first 2 episodes of Where's Wanda on Apple TV Plus now. Alongside the premiere of Where's Wanda, today also sees the penultimate episodes of this season of Slow Horses and Bad Monkey. I can't believe we're getting to the end of those 2 already. I mean, Slow Horses always goes so quick because it's short, but Bad Monkey, I feel like I just got started with this one.
We also get a new episode of Midnight Family, which I really enjoyed the conversation that Jonathan and yourself had last week. It prompted me to check out the documentary that this series is based on, and it's on Pluto TV in the US, so check it out. You can watch it for free, which is amazing. Really, really grabbed me, loved it, and I love this series. So another recommendation there.
That's great. Well, we've had German and Spanish so far. Let's throw in a couple more languages, Sigmund, because on Friday we've got new episodes of Pachinko, which of course features Korean and Japanese, and La Maison in French, so Lots and lots of different language series to check out on Apple TV Plus right now. Friday also sees the premiere of Curses Season 2. And then on Saturday and Sunday, MLS Season Pass continues. Of course, those broadcasts are also available in multiple languages, English and Spanish. So very cool to see.
And we carry on that theme with our extra this week, Unidos, Latin American Heritage Month, The Collection, a editorial within the TV app. Very, very cool. I wasn't sure on where this celebration kind of fell in terms of the calendar. It's a bit of an in-between, right?
It's an interesting one. It's not a calendar month. It's actually from September 15th to October 15th. So when I saw this collection, I thought, oh no, we missed it. It must have been September. But no, we're still right in the middle of it. So a great time to celebrate. Check out this collection. There's lots to see here. Of course, tons of Apple originals like Land of Women, Women in Blue, Acapulco's in there as well, which is great. But then just tons and tons of films and series from Latin American creators and featuring Latin American cast members as well. I mean, I could go through all of them, but there's just a ton. You got Problemista and Frida. You've got Civil War in here and just all kinds of stuff to check out. A great collection and lots of creators that, of course, we want to celebrate and support during this special month.
One show we need to celebrate, Devon, is a show that saw its finale last week, and we're celebrating it with a spoiler recap of Women in Blue. In 1971, 4 women defy ultra-conservative norms and join Mexico's first female police force, only to discover that it's a publicity stunt to distract the media from a serial killer. As the body count grows, they make a pact to bring the killer to justice.
El encuerador de Tlalpan ha atacado nuevamente.
3 hermanas muertas! ¡Y ellos no hicieron nada!
Vamos a abrir nuestras puertas para que cualquier mujer que desee se pueda unir a la policía.
La policía agarró al cabrón equivocado. Lo vamos a encontrar. Ahora, a trabajar.
Created by Fernando Rosvar, with a cast including Barbara Mori as Maria, Amarita Risgado as Gabina, Zemina Sariñana as Angeles, and Natalia Tellez as Valentina. Devon, what did you think of this? Because my understanding is this is based on a true story?
In a certain sense. So it's based on some true events. There actually was a small female police force introduced in Mexico in the 70s to help with the police's image. That was very much true. And the creators actually spoke with some of the original Azules to reflect their experiences, especially the sexism that they faced in the series. The part that's not based on true events, and I actually Googled around about this to try to find out more about it before I found out it was fictional, is the whole serial killer plot. That was fictionalized to represent the real dangers that women face. And so based on some true experiences, but the actual case they're working wasn't necessarily based in fact. But I'll say this is a fantastic series that's, I think, sort of flown under the radar, but I think is actually well worth people's time. So I hope people will check it out. It follows these 4 women who become police officers, each for their own reasons, but they form a bond with one another as they work around the system to solve this case that the male higher-ups would rather sweep under the rug. So the female police force is created in the wake of the serial killer who's terrorizing women in Mexico City, and the head of the police force, who is not a policeman himself, he's like a kind of a marketing, political specialist guy. And so he's just trying to improve their image rather than actually dealing with the issue at hand. And then the idea they have is, okay, well, let's introduce women to the police force, make them feel, empowered and kind of distract from the fact that actually women in Mexico City are in a lot of danger from this very dangerous person who's out here hurting them. And so it's an interesting setup. These women, they're very gung-ho. They believe in this cause that they're joining. They really do want to help. And so when they go through the academy and pass their training, and then they get into the police force and realize that, oh yeah, you're kind of just here for publicity. We'll let you go kind of hang out in parks and give people directions, and we'll give you a whistle, but that's all you can really do. They're disappointed, and then they start picking up the slack of the male investigators who are not pursuing the actual culprit of these murders, and these 4 women are the ones who actually take up the investigation, which is very interesting to see.
So, like, from the description, this all sounds very heavy, but could you give us an idea of the tone of the show for anyone that hasn't yet seen this?
Yeah, it's very, very dramatic. It's not apologetic about being a drama for sure. And I'll say it does dip into soapy territory every once in a while, which is, especially around romantic relationships and Maria's life with her husband, and he's been cheating on her, and so she's trying to navigate that. That gets particularly dramatic, but there's also a great crime and investigation aspect of it, which is something that people who love true crime and that kind of thing, I think, can get really into. And there is some comic relief along the way, especially from Angeles, as she bluntly comments on the actions of others and then stumbles into her first romantic relationship. I love her perspective on life. She's very by the book. She takes things very literally and is not afraid to just call people out, which I very much appreciate. And there's no malice to it. She's just very blunt. And I love Angeles, and she made me laugh quite a bit. The biggest emphasis throughout the show, though, is the sexism that women faced at the time and the way these 4 women fight to overcome that sexism. It's hard to believe, but it really wasn't that long ago that it was considered taboo for a woman to work outside the home in many places. And that is a conversation that's had many, many times throughout this show. And it's 1970s. It's really not that long ago for these women who are trying to go out into the police force and try to do some good. And they're meeting all this resistance from people who say, oh, you should just go home and tend to your family, right? Which, very unfortunate. They're constantly told to quiet down, to put their ideas and research aside, and to just let the men handle it, even though the men around them are mostly incompetent, right? Or at least blinded by their way of doing things and not open to other ideas and other approaches. So these women do eventually solve the case of the undresser. They're put in charge of the investigation very briefly, which is like this moment of victory. And you love to see these guys finally realize what these women offer and give them the power to actually put their plan in action and catch this person. And then they're immediately forced to hide their involvement at the risk of being put in prison for skirting the system. It's really incredible. They're basically forced to sign NDAs to let the male investigators take the credit, to the point that there's a line that really stuck out to me. As part of the investigation, Maria approaches this other man who's in prison for murder and gets his perspective on the case, and kind of he helps her get in the mind of someone like that and try to start analyzing patterns and figure out who this person could be. Well, when the higher-ups figure out that this guy's been involved, they let him out of prison and celebrate him as a hero who helped solve this case while keeping these women out of the spotlight. And so Valentina has this line where she says they'd rather applaud a murderer than a woman. And that really stuck out to me as just emblematic of what these women were facing. And, of course, it's a fictional story based on true events, but I think it's reflecting real issues that people have faced.
Not just in 1971 either.
Definitely. Yeah, it's ongoing. We hope that we're getting better in some ways, and hopefully stories like this will continue to push the conversation and get things better. But it's definitely an issue that continues to be a problem. So I'll say, just to wrap up this conversation about this show, I'd say it's inspiring, it's infuriating, and it's a reminder of how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. So I think it's worth checking out. A great story played out in 10 parts on Apple TV Plus, available in full now.
All right, well, we've come to that part in the podcast where we give our up next picks and share some TV app highlights. So let's start with some TV app highlights to add to your watch list. See, I'm ahead of the game and on brand. Last week, we actually saw quite a bit. The Front Room, which is on Premium VOD, stars pop singer Brandy in a prestige horror film from A24 where everything goes to hell for a newly pregnant woman after her mother-in-law moves in. And as the diabolical guest tries to get her claws on the child, she must draw the line somewhere. Now, this features the voice of Catherine Hunter. If you recognise that name, you're either really into the stage and theatre world, or you remember the actress for her memorable portrayal of all three witches in Joel Coen's The Tragedy of Macbeth, which is on Apple TV+. She also won the New York Film Critics Circle Best Supporting Actress Award for that role, and had another unforgettable performance in the Academy Award-winning Best Picture Award-winning Poor Things last year. So very, very cool there. Mr. McMahon, the documentary on Netflix, was, I'm going to say, 8-part, maybe 6-part documentary. I don't remember because I watched it all in one sitting. Really, really interesting to see the story of Vince McMahon, the person behind the camera, and how he almost kind of took on the role of the character that he was portrayed on camera for. And he seems to be a very, very confused individual who ended up doing some absolutely disgusting things, given the power that he had. And yeah, fascinating documentary. Not going to be for everyone, but highly, highly recommended. Netflix had a bit of a week last week as well. We got the documentary Will and Harper with Will Ferrell and his close friend of 30 years who's coming out as a trans woman. And the two decide to embark on a cross-country road trip, and you get to follow them on this and process everything, which I found absolutely fascinating. In terms of highlights for this week, we have some previous recommendations coming to streaming. Babes on Hulu, hilarious comedy, highly recommend it. Evil Does Not Exist, one of my previous Up Next picks, coming to the Criterion channel this week, with Deadpool and Wolverine now available on Premium VOD, alongside Speak No Evil, which is actually a remake of a 2022 Norwegian film, which is very, very strange, which I actually would recommend watching instead, because it was first, and whilst performances in the remake are very, very good, the film doesn't necessarily add anything more to warrant a English language remake less than 2 years after the original's release. On Thursday, number of movies. Of course, spooky season is upon us, which means lots of spooky content, including Salem's Lot on Max. This is actually the first film adaptation of Stephen King's second ever novel, following couple of previous mini-series adaptations that honestly were too long in the tooth. Gary Doberman directs this one, and his track record with King adaptations is solid because, of course, he was behind both screenplays for It Chapters 1 and 2, so you kind of know what to expect there. For something a little tamer, you have the animated spin-off of Gremlins. I was a big fan of Gremlins 2, the new batch, growing up. Well, now we have Gremlins, the Wild Batch on Max. Alongside another Up Next pick of mine previously, We Grow Now. Brilliant, brilliant film on Netflix from Minhal Baig. And on Friday, a number of titles to look forward to and look out for. Dee Dee on Peacock is set in 2008 during the last month of summer before high school begins, with an impressionable 13-year-old Taiwanese American boy learning what his family can't teach him: how to skate, how to flirt, and how to love your mum. If that synopsis hasn't got you hooked already, I don't know what will. It's What's Inside is on Netflix. This is Greg Jardine's horror comedy, which was actually bought for $17 million at this year's Sundance Film Festival, and is set around a pre-wedding party that descends into an existential nightmare when an estranged friend shows up with a mysterious suitcase. And truly, finally, on Sunday, the franchise makes its debut on Max. This is John Brown of Succession and Veep fame, with a side-splitting series directed by Sam Mendes and Lisa Johnson. Some incredible names here, following the crew of an unloved franchise movie fighting for their place in a savage and unruly cinematic universe. Lots of kind of behind the scenes shenanigans. I think a lot of people are really going to fall for this. It looks fantastic. So they are the TV highlights from last week and this week. Lots to watch. But if none of that grabs you, we've still got 2 up next picks for you. What have you got for us, Devon?
Well, my pick this week is The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, The Book of Carol. It's a show with too many titles, and I think it's hilarious the way they've advertised this, but it's a spinoff of The Walking Dead centered on Daryl Dixon. And this is actually the 2nd season, and this is notable because the show was originally announced when the original Walking Dead series was coming to an end, and it was going to feature fan favorite characters, both Daryl and Carol. Well, Melissa McBride, who plays Carol, had to drop out of the series at the last minute, so it became all about Daryl. Well, she's back for season 2, so she gets her own subtitle now. But this is basically What If The Walking Dead, but in France. So instead of wandering the East Coast for 11 years like we did on The Walking Dead, now we're going to be spending some time in Paris and other parts of France. And it's very interesting the way that Daryl ends up there, and now Carol is trying to get there to help her friend. And so that's kind of where we meet her at the beginning of the season. So, just the series continuing on. The Walking Dead's never going to die. It's like a TV foundational franchise now, and it's spinning off in all these different ways, but it's cool to see these 2 characters that people love so much from the original reuniting. And again, I just love the title, Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, Book of Carol. It just tells you everything you need to know. And that is on AMC Plus for everyone who wants to check that out.
Very, very cool. This time last year, I was gearing up to sit down with Jonathan Reed, who was on the show last week, as we watched Martin Scorsese give a talk on his career and his thoughts on film. It was a moment I will never forget, and it's a highlight from last year's London Film Festival, hosted by, of course, the British Film Institute. And my up next pick this week kind of ties everything together, because it is Made in England, the films of Powell and Pressburger, available this week on Premium VOD, and I think it's going to be available for rental as well. And it sees Martin Scorsese celebrate the enduring legacy of visionary writer-directors Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, 2 of Britain's greatest filmmakers, with Scorsese taking a deep dive into their filmographies, including The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, Black Narcissus, The Red Shoes, which Martin Scorsese actually had a hand in on restoring before it was released through the Criterion Collection, alongside Peeping Tom and The Tales of Hoffman. If you haven't checked out any of these films, I highly recommend that you do. This was a documentary that I missed on the big screen at the end of last year. I saw it advertised as I was going into my screenings for Killers of the Flower Moon, and never got round to watching. So really looking forward to checking this out. Learning a little bit more from the historical context of the films that we love and the films that have come from previous generations. And that is my up next pick for this week, ahead of a very, very exciting week ahead with the beginning of the BFI London Film Festival 2024, Devon.
An exciting week for sure, but we will save all of that for our upcoming episode next week, which, little programming note, it will be next Friday instead of next Wednesday, because we've got some exciting stuff related to London Film Festival that we want to share, so it'll come a couple days late. But that's all for us for this week. Thank you so much for listening. We always appreciate your feedback, so be sure to reach out to us on social media via the links in the show notes. Let us know what you're thinking about Apple Originals, about the topics that we discussed, about the show itself. We always love to hear what you're thinking. You can always email the show or send us an iMessage to magic@macstories.net as well.
We'll be back next Friday with our London Film Festival special, including highlights on limited series Disclaimer, The Last of the Sea Women, and the upcoming Steve McQueen directed film Blitz. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.